Hello, everyone. This is Paige Tidwell Kaysen. I'm with Advancing Employment at the Institute on Human Development and Disability at IHGD, or University of Georgia. And welcome to our second webinar in our series of Advancing Employment Spring 2020 webinar series. Today, we are very, very happy to have Marion Curry with us. She is going to talk to us about her experiences as a director of an employment program for many, many years, and the lessons that she learned. She has previously been the executive director of Diversified Enterprises and has been, or is currently, a consultant with Mark Gold & Associates, which she has been doing since 1975. So I see that a couple of y'all have raised some hands. If you want to put any questions in the question box, and I'll try to address those as we move forward. I see Shannon, I'll take a look at yours in just a second. But we're going to let Marion go ahead and get started.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be with you. I'm also glad to be doing this with Paige. She's my technical backup here, so we're going to make this work. So I'm really interested, before we get started, in figuring out who's here. So we're going to do a couple of quick polls. And so Paige, if you'll put up that first poll, this one's going to let me know what your role is.
Okay, we're almost, give a few more seconds. All right, and we have 63% are employment specialists, 5% day program staff, 13% administrator, manager, and 21% other. Mary, can you see the results on your end?
I can't. I'm still seeing the question.
All right, there you
go. Okay. All right, and so I have another question. This is more about knowing who you all are. I want to know what state you come from so we can kind of figure out where you're from.
Okay. All right, let's see here. Can you see that, Marion?
I can't. There we go. I can see it. Wow, we have a lot of Floridians here. Well, that's great. I grew up in St. Petersburg, so hi, everyone. And we've got Georgians, and then we have 2% others. So that's great. I will tell y'all before we launch into the actual presentation that my examples are really Georgia examples, because what I'm talking about is the history of developing employment in Georgia today. I think it's probably applicable to other states from some of my other experiences, but kind of bear with me with all my Georgia examples. So first slide, Paige.
All right.
So we started, or I started, with the staff of Diversified on this journey in 1983. And the question is why did we do it? It was 1983, for goodness sakes. And we launched into, from Diversified Enterprises, developing real jobs, next, and really trying to figure out community presence and participation. And so what was the reason for that? Well, There were lots and lots of reasons. So I want to give you a context, and I'll tie this context back to today when we get to the end of the presentation. So I want to take you back to 1972. And in 1972, there was this huge development of community training centers. There were a lot, there had been a few already funded. The block grants had come down from the federal government, and they just multiplied all over the state of Georgia. In fact, between 1972 and 74, there wound up being a training center in every single county in Georgia, just about. And these centers, I mean, I was fresh out of college. I was a social worker in one of these centers in Ben Hill County in Fitzgerald, Georgia. My then husband was a director, so it was sort of a family thing. And it was a come one, come all. Anybody that had an intellectual disability was invited to come, and their families were happy to have them come because it was daycare. It was all about that. Well, it didn't take me very long working in the training center thinking, you know, we could do better than this. We didn't have any direction. We had kids and we had grown-ups, and people were really kind of from age 50 down to 2 to toddlers. And trying to figure out what to do was a huge challenge, and there weren't many places to learn about it. But I had had some volunteer experience while I was in college and working in a work activity center, or volunteering in a work activity center in Macon. And so I knew people could do some work. So I got permission to write a grant to fund a work activity center in Ben Hill County. And it was actually supposed to support 4 counties, because the assumption was there weren't that many people that could go to work, right? Next slide. So on September 2nd, 1974, we opened Modern Industries. It was next. It was a huge innovation. It was one of about 4 work activity centers, is my memory, in the state. We had a 14C certificate. That was huge. We could like pay people piece rate. And we thought we had just sort of done the most exciting, most wonderful thing in the world. We just thought we were really cutting edge. And very excited to be doing that work, to being able to have programs that were all about people working. And in the first week after I opened the center, I got to go to a training in North Carolina. Next slide. And there I met Mark Gold. I was absolutely blown away by what Mark was showing us and teaching us in this workshop in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He showed us a film, not of the gentleman you see in this picture, but another gentleman very much like him. For those of you who don't know who Mark Gold was, Mark did research in the late 60s around doing task analysis and teaching people who happen to be deaf and blind and have an intellectual disability at Dixon State School in Dixon, Illinois, to put together a 14-piece Bendix bicycle brake. And that's what you see in this picture. He was a behaviorist in many ways. He built his knowledge on what came out of industry, out of manufacturing, how to break tasks down and do it efficiently and effectively. And that was where the whole concept of try another way came from, and it's now called systematic instruction. What happened that week for me in the time that I got to meet Mark initially was it blew out of the water everything that I thought I knew about people with disabilities working. I really thought that they could only do the most menial task. And so the first contract we had at Modern Industries was painting cans, gallon metal cans, and we dipped them in paint and let them dry, and they were sold to a nursery. My memory is people made a penny a can for painting those cans, and I thought that was a big deal that people could do that. Well, after I saw Mark and saw him demonstrate the bicycle brake, I realized I had way underestimated what was possible for people. So that really made me rethink everything that I thought that Modern Industries was supposed to be. And being young and not afraid to ask questions, I asked Mark if he wouldn't help teach me and the staff of Modern Industries. And there are only about 6 of us because we were only serving 20 people that first year. If he would teach us how to do the Try Another Way form of training. And he was incredibly generous. He agreed to be our consultant. I think I paid him $100 for his visits, which is hard to believe in this day and age. But anyhow, he actually came to Modern Industries and he taught us. And we went to the University of Illinois that next summer and joined with some other people he had trained in Illinois for sort of a retreat where we worked on our training skills and talked about what we were learning. And so my staff and I got really, really excited about the possibilities. Next slide, please. Paige, can you advance the slide?
Yes, ma'am, hang tight.
Okay, there, thanks. So I think probably the most important thing that Mark taught us, he mentored us, was to believe and to really take seriously that if the learner doesn't learn, it's because the trainer hasn't figured out how to teach the task. That the problem wasn't the learner. The problem was what we as trainers didn't know how to do yet, how to transfer the information. Mark used to say if somebody had one volitional movement, he thought he could teach them to do something. And I found through the years that was true. So that inspiration made us really shift from thinking about can contracts, painting cans, and to looking around at what was needed in our area by industry. And what we figured out pretty quickly, because Delco Remy was building a plant, is they needed pallets. This meant that we had to teach people how to use industrial saws, industrial nail guns, and how to run forklifts. And I remember being somewhat hesitant about that, and Mark was quick to remind me that if the learner didn't learn it was because as a trainer, we hadn't figured it out. So we went about the business of developing a really good pallet factory. We were producing hundreds of pallets every week for Delco Remy, and eventually for some other manufacturers within about a 50-mile radius. We even began to do some alarm systems for sewage plant manufacturer in Thomasville. So we got into doing some electronics, which duplicated some of Mark's research. And we were really thinking that we were doing a lot of good stuff. Another thing that happened during that time frame is Mark began to do some one-day presentations in Georgia. This eventually led to the Georgia project. which was a statewide train project. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute and its significance in all of this history. But then he did agree to come to Fitzgerald, Georgia and do a one-day training. And we invited people from all over South Georgia. And I remember as I was playing this, my phone rang in the office, and the person on the other end of the line, next slide, please. And as I say in the title of the slide, I don't know if this was serendipity or luck or who knows what, but on the other end of the line, next, was John O'Brien. And John said to me, some of you I'm sure know him, John very quietly said on the other end of the line, hello, I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Georgia Mental Health Institute in Atlanta, Georgia. I understand you're going to have Dr. Gold down there in your area to do a workshop. I'd like to come. And of course I said, sure, come on. I had no idea who he was other than he was a deputy superintendent. Next. And with him on that day, to the best of my memory, Connie Lyle came. They weren't married at the time. I think she was working for the ARC, but they were both in the audience and watching Mark present and train someone on the bicycle brake, which he always did. And that began a relationship for me and for my then husband, Philip J., with John and Connie. And John, in his usual quiet way, said to me, and to Philip one day, he said, you know, there's this thing, next, put it up, called PASS. And we haven't done any of these evaluations in Georgia, but we would like for you all to be the first. Well, being young and thinking that we knew most everything, we said, oh yeah, we'd like to do that. For those of you who are not familiar with PASS, PASS stood for Program Analysis of Service Systems. It was an evaluation instrument developed by Wolf Wolfensberger. It looked at programs to see if they were doing what they said they were doing, and were they doing it in a way that helped people become more independent. And we were really sure we were doing great work, that we were doing amazing stuff and really making a difference, and that all was great. Well, we had the PASS assessment. John and Connie team led 2 groups of people. They assessed both the training center that Philip still ran, and by the way, Beth Mount was a college intern at, and my workshop. And I was pretty sure the workshop was going to look really good compared to the training center. Well, we looked better, but neither program looked good. And what we learned is that while we thought we were doing the right thing for people, we were still keeping them really separate. And we were really not creating independence. That in what we were doing, we were keeping people really under control. That even though we might be training them some pretty important skills, that those skills weren't really leading to a life of independence. And it was crushing. It was heartbreaking, because we had worked so hard to try and do the right thing. And so the only thing I can say that was sort of the saving grace, because it was very hard to hear that tough criticism and to really know it was true, is that as time has gone by, I've been grateful to Maya Angelou, and you'll see the quote on your screen, when we know better, we do better. And so we took that to heart. And in taking that to heart, I began to get this niggling feeling that a workshop wasn't as good as I thought it was. I didn't quite know how to get anywhere else. But I began worrying about, could we get people jobs? Next slide. So this is a headline out of the Fitzgerald Herald Leader in about 1977. You'll see the horrible language in that headline. But if you could read the article, what the article actually says is that the editor says, Mrs. J is complaining that people believe that the only thing the people, her clients, can do is make pallets and do woodworking, and that she knows they can do a whole lot more, that they can go to work with regular jobs with regular people. So in 1977, I was worrying about this because of the PASS assessment. We tried from Modern Industries to do some job placement. It was really a mess. We got people some jobs, and then I was quickly told that you can't do that with your funding, and so that we couldn't keep supporting them. And we tried to have employers just support them, but we'd done such a good job of convincing the employers that they needed us that didn't work out. Went back to vocational rehabilitation at that time to see if we could get Voc Rehab to take these folks on, and Voc Rehab told us, well, no, we certified that we can't serve them. That's why you are. So it was a real catch-22. We couldn't figure it out. We couldn't make it happen. And it was really frustrating. I could see where to go. I just didn't know how to get there. I didn't know how to figure out the funding. I knew that we knew how to train, but I didn't know how to have people believe that they could support the people, because we'd done such a good job talking about what good trainers we were and how important we were to the employer. So it just wasn't working. But there were other things going on at the same time. So I hope you're beginning to get a sense that during this time period between 1974 and 83, there was a bunch of stuff happening that was coming together, that was influencing what we were thinking. So first of all, we had the Try Another Way technology. We knew we could train anybody to do anything. We had the PASS assessment that said, yeah, maybe you do know how to train people, but people aren't getting independence. They aren't getting real lives. You know, you're not doing what you say you're about doing. And so we're struggling. And next slide, please. By then, Beth Mound had graduated from college, gotten her master's degree, and I think she was working on her PhD, and she was developing futures planning. And we were all, as I keep saying, we were all really young, and we were really working hard to figure it out. And part of the way we were figuring this out is the futures planning brought to bear what Beth was helping us see is that you really had to ask the people, and you had to think with them about who was in their lives and what relationships were there and what were their dreams and what gave them energy and what gave them aliveness and power. And so it was a huge shift from we were doing to people to listening to people, and then figuring out how together we moved forward. And so this was another piece, but we also knew that we still had to keep questioning, that there was still something missing. So next, please. there was something that started happening in Georgia, and it went on for about 8 years, called the Community Conference. And one of the people who got invited in to one of those early conferences is the man you see talking to Beth, and that was John McKnight. John came out of the Northwestern University in Chicago. His background and his research was in community organizing, which seemed like it was a little sideways from the field of disability, but he immediately got it. I mean, he understood that what we were talking about was people who've been separated or put down or told that they couldn't be exactly like everybody else. And he immediately saw that, and he began to help us understand in the field and through the community conferences that the answers were in the community. The answers weren't in our professional lives. That the answers that we were looking for really existed in the community, and that the buildings we had were actually in the way, which we had already begun to realize was true. And he made the clear link for us that it was, and of course today still is, a civil rights issue. Separate but equal will never be equal. And so we got that. We began to really figure that one out. Next slide. So Mark left this planet way too early. Many of us still miss him. He died in 1982 of cancer. And I think it was the last conversation I had with him. And by this time, we had combined the programs in Fitzgerald. So Modern Industries was one, because the training center had gone away. All the kids had gone to school, and now only left adults. So it was only Modern Industries. And so that meant that I had to go do something else. So I got assigned to Tift County and to what would become Diversified Enterprises. And this was 2 years into my tenure there, and I was struggling with how to move the program forward and still worrying about the problem of being able to go get people jobs, because I inherited another work activity center when I went to Tifton. And Mark, I was whining about, well, the funding won't pay for us to get people jobs. And he very bluntly said to me, Marion, if your funding won't let you get people jobs, find other funding. And it was a real clear statement, and it kind of knocked me off my feet. And shortly after that, Mark died. He died in December of 82. Well, in January of 1983, a new law was coming into effect. It was called JTPA, Job Training Partnership Act. It replaced CETA, which was part of the Great Society Jobs Program. And it had come to Georgia, and people on the planning councils for JTPA were kind of struggling to figure out what to do with it, but they had put out an RFP. And so I decided to write a grant to get that funding. I didn't do this totally on my own. I didn't do it without asking permission from all the right people. I did go to the district health director and the developmental services chief, who was my boss, and said, I'd like to write this grant. I'd like for people to be able to go to work. They said, well, let's ask Atlanta. And we talked to the folks in Atlanta and said, the funding we have, the block grant funding, will not allow us to put people to work. What do you think if we went for this grant and tried to see if we could in fact do what we believe we can do, which is get people real jobs? And Atlanta said, sure, just don't bill for the services you're doing under the block grant at the same time that you're billing under JTPA if you get funded for that, which made sense to us because you can't double dip. We all know that. And we said, okay, so this is a big experiment. We want you to be our partners in this. And so basically from Tift County up through the district to the state office, we were in partnership. Well, we wrote the grant. We got funded. We got funded to put 20 people to work in 1983. We're going to do it in 4 counties. At the time, we were required, the JTPA requirement was that people had to work at least 20 hours and they had to make at least minimum wage. So we looked around. I looked within the Tift County program. We got the directors in the programs in the other 3 counties to look and see, were there any people that they were serving who'd like to go to work, who'd like a job? And sure enough, there were 20 people who wanted to go to work. So we took some of those folks who had been highly trained through Mark's consultation, either with Modern Industries a few years before or through the Georgia Project. And we asked 2 of those people, would you like to be a job coach? I know when I said job coach, I didn't even know exactly what I was saying, but I'd heard the word somewhere, so we asked them that. And we basically just said to them, you're going to be using the Try Another Way technology to get people to work. And we didn't know how we were going to do it. Truly, the thing you need to understand here is this was all a huge experiment. We were making it up. And I think sometime about a month or so into the implementation of this grant, someone from Atlanta said, oh, this is supported employment. I didn't even know it was supported employment. I was just getting people jobs. So we did it. We got 20 people jobs. The same 20 people who raised their hands to begin with all went to work. They all worked 20 hours a week or more, and they all made minimum wage or more. And what happened after that first year was just mind-blowing. We learned so much about what a part-time job, what a difference a part-time job could make in someone's livelihood, make in terms of what they were able to do in life. We found out that people who we thought we had to drive to work could get rides with coworkers. We found out that supervisors, when we said, well, we're going to be here, but we're going to have to fade out, that they would say things to us like, oh, Willie James ain't different than old Otis back there. He's kind of odd. It's fine. We can handle it. And what we learned was to stop telling employers that we were the only ones that could do it, and that employers themselves were, pretty willing to support people on the job. So much of what we had been battling for so long, we discovered was ourselves and our own preconceptions one more time. And so that was really successful. It got a lot of attention. The folks in Atlanta were paying close attention to it. We applied for a second year. We expanded to 60 people and expanded, it seems like it was 2 more counties, and added some more people in the original 4. By the end of the 3rd year, we were in all 10 counties that were our health district. We had placed 100 people. 100 people had gone to work part-time. 100 people were in the labor force. We had a few people lost a job, but then they went back to work. They went to another job. What I know now in retrospect is it was a really bad fit. It was a bad choice for a job for them. And we had also learned that some people would say, I want to go to work, but when you really got down to getting ready to go to work, they really didn't want to go to work. And so they would back out of the process. They would take themselves out of the process really before we got very far along. In fact, before we even got them a job. So we didn't have anybody who left a job after they got it. We had 2 people who actually got fired, but then they went back to work somewhere else. So it was a huge success. And the people on the council that managed the funding, somewhere in that towards the end of the second year and the beginning of the third year of our funding, noticed that disabilities got funded by somebody else in the state. And they wrote a letter saying, listen, you guys have proven that people can go to work. We think your own funding ought to pay for this. And sure enough, that letter, we carried it with fear and trepidation to Atlanta and gave it to Ralph McEwen, who was over adult services for the division at that time, and said, here's what they said. They don't want to fund us anymore. They think y'all ought to. And bless his heart, he began to figure that out. But also, I want you to think back to 1983. The other thing that was happening is that, yeah, we had some people who wanted to go to work, but we still had some people who didn't want to leave the security of their friends. And that kept pushing us too, because the futures planning work that we had done pushed us to realize that we had to listen to people. So next slide. So I talked about Beth and that she had, in her doctoral work, developed futures planning. Beth became a consultant for us as we were moving into employment and then looking at the rest of the people who were still in the program and thinking, what do we do now? We know that we shouldn't keep people separated. So through about a 6-month process where Beth facilitated conversations with staff and helped teach us about how to ask questions of families differently than we may have done it in the past, we figured this out. So there were 38 people served by Diversified Enterprises at that time. I think that was a huge gift to us. It was a small number, so it was a manageable number. And we went to every single family and asked them some questions. One of the questions we ask is, your family member is going out and doing some things in the community already. How or what would it take, and how would you feel about your family members spending more time doing things in the community? And families kind of, responded with, well, what are you talking about? We live in the community. Of course, we go into the community. And we said, but we want to do more of it. Like, we don't want to do our aerobics class in the building anymore. We want to go be a part of an aerobics class in the community, because we had checked around and found out that there were regular aerobics classes. And families, by and large, all of them really said, well, it's okay, but, and the but was, that they had learned to trust the staff. See, staff turnover in those days, because we had block grant funding, was not an issue. We had staff that had been hired the first day programs opened and had been there at that point 13 years. And so families really trusted those staff, and they said, I want to make sure Verna goes with Angie and her friends to the aerobics class. I said, done deal, no problem. We can make that happen. And it was that conversation got repeated in that kind of comment or in that same way with every single family. We only had one family that objected, and we offered, because the nearest program was really only 16 miles away, and we had worked out a way for her to get transported to that program. Ultimately, that family did not take advantage of that option. They decided to stick with the staff they knew, and she stuck with the friends she knew, and it worked out. So in the year we started employment, we also went from having a building to only having offices. The buses would go out and pick people up, or the vans would go out and pick people up. They'd all congregate in one place. It's at Herring Hall, as you see in the picture. This was on the campus of ABAC. It was a building that wasn't being really utilized by the college at that point, and we had office space in it. And we would gather there, and then everybody would, go out into the community and do what they were doing. Some groups of people would gather up for lunch. Now, these groups were admittedly 5 to 8 people. Was that full integration? No, but we were still learning. We were doing the best we could. What was critical in this process, while we're creating employment and we're creating full integration, was that Beth played an important role in that she provided a neutral place for reflection. She facilitated conversations and planning and thinking with not only the staff, but with families, with the board members, with folks from in the hierarchy, like my boss, and the folks from Atlanta were engaged at a certain level in this too. So it was not, Marion Curry going off in a room and making this up. It really was taking the best thinking all of us could have at that time to figure this out. And I think that lesson is one that is incredibly important as we move forward. So by the end of 1986, we had created supported employment. We had a fully integrated program in Tifton, Georgia, called Diversified Enterprises. And you'd think it'd be time to declare a victory. Next slide, please. But we knew we weren't done. So in this picture, you see Ralph McEwen kind of leaning against the staircase. Ralph has been and will be forever one of my heroes, because he was the bureaucrat in Atlanta that knew how to navigate the system well enough to make this happen. Having people who understand the system and can help you do the right thing is critically important. And that was Ralph. Ralph would tell you, no, I don't want to learn how to train anybody to do anything. He was on a PASS assessment team for a program. He hated it. But what he did know is how to navigate around the rules, and both the federal rules and the state rules, in a way that we were doing it within the boundaries that were acceptable. The gentleman with glasses is Larry Rhodes. And one of the things I learned from Mark and his research work was how important it was to connect with people doing the cutting edge work in the country. Larry worked for the University of Oregon, the STP program, Standardized Training Program, and they were the organization after Mark's death that were really pushing the research and employment in the country. And so I reached out to Larry and asked him to be our consultant to help us keep pushing forward to do better work, to keep asking us the hard questions, because I knew that people weren't still standing on their own beside us. So I know some of you are beginning to think, okay, all right, then we got all this ancient history. How does this relate to today? Well, I think here are the things that I think are the lessons that you carry forward from 40 years ago. As practitioners, we need to pay attention to the research, and we need to do everything in our power to implement best practices. We need to find mentors. I know that had it not been for Mark's mentorship of this young woman, I couldn't have done the work that I was doing without the mentorship of John O'Brien and what I call the abuse of past and normalization at the time. I wouldn't have learned that it wasn't just a job. It was about the relationships. It was about people's civil rights. The Beth Mounts, she was younger than I was. And she had been an intern in the program there in Fitzgerald, but I saw her grow, and I continue to learn from Beth today with her, how she and John both continue to push the edges of what we think about person-centered work. And I also think it's important to remember to have partners. I think the partnership with the bureaucracy is important. That you can't sue City Hall, right? So you've got to find a way to work with them, and because I do believe that people in the bureaucracy really want to do the right thing as much as practitioners do. And the other thing I learned was to really listen to families. That listening yields an ability to support people that you can't do if you're saying, here's what you're going to do, versus tell me about what it is that you're excited about. And also, as practitioners, we have a responsibility to share the possibilities for people, so that they can see that working as in fast food or a janitorial job isn't the only possibility, so they can see that they can in fact have real careers. I think that's very applicable to today. And we need to remember that separate but equal is never equal. That has been proven in the courts. It's been proven in real life. And the most important part of that is, if we don't stand beside people, we'll never know their gifts. And finally, I think something that is remarkable now is that, unlike in 1980s, the law's on our side. The law is saying people should have the opportunity to at least try work. People people should be able to have services in typical places and typical times and enjoy life like everybody else. So I want to close and open for questions with this final slide. So the next slide. So I think I love Stephen Covey's quote. I've been using it for years, and that is the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing, which in this case is it's employment, that people have a right and should have the opportunity to go to work, and that they should be standing beside us, and we as community members have a great opportunity to appreciate the gifts that people offer. So with that, I'll close and see if we've got any questions. Do we have any questions, Paige?
That was very informative, Marion. That was a great presentation. So we have about a little less than 10 minutes. And if folks want to raise their hand if they have any questions they would like to ask Marion, I can open up your microphone. All right, well, I see one has come in, and I'm just going to read it here. So when y'all were, making some changes and realized, things need to be done differently, how did you know you needed some technical assistance?
Well, from the moment I met Mark, I knew I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. So pretty quickly I figured out, I don't know how to do this. I don't know stuff. So I really from very early on in 1974, when Modern Industries was established, I knew I need technical assistance. And fortunately, I had some money I could pay for it with, and that stood me in good stead. I mean, I retired 3 years ago, and I was still getting technical assistance. So having someone outside of your organization and outside of what you're doing every single day, because you get caught up in fighting the fire at your feet and worrying about whatever the next thing is, that having that technical assistance that keeps you focused on keeping the main thing is huge.
That's right. We have a question here from Shannon Wood. Shannon, I've opened up your microphone. Shannon, are you there? Hello? Well, I guess she's gun shy, but I see another one that's here, and one that I think is something I've heard about. When you were going through some of the changes and putting people in real jobs in the community, did the staff have to lose their jobs?
The easy answer is no. Staff did have to learn new skills. They had to learn new ways of doing their job. And so there were some people over time who decided to leave. Nobody got fired. Nobody was told you gotta go. But some people decided that that's not what they wanted to do, and they left. So we didn't do it by kicking people out the door. We worked really hard to give people the right tools to go do the work we're asking them to do. Again, that's a place where we use technical assistance.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions here. One is from Caroline. What are some informal ways to build trust with families who are concerned about their loved one going to work? And I'm assuming working in the community.
Well, it's a lot of conversations, Caroline. We learned how to ask questions differently. Instead of like asking families when we're getting ready to go from having a facility to only having offices, we didn't ask them, how would you feel if we closed the building? Because that, of course, would have scared them to death, right? Instead, we thought, well, what is it that we're really wanting to know? And so we framed the questions around if we change how we're doing support, what would it take for you to be comfortable? And what are you most worried about if we change things? What comes up for you? And then we try to walk through problem solving each one of those questions. The work question, the one that came up even back then was, are we going to lose our benefits? We didn't have benefits navigators then, and so I made really good friends with a Social Security office person, and they started researching and getting really clear answers for families. And they developed a little worksheet for us that they said, this isn't the end all, but this is a starting point, so you can get them in the door to come talk with us. And it was simple. It was a fill in the blank sort of equation about you can make this much money and you'll lose this amount of benefits, and if you look at this, you're this much better off. And so that's kind of what the sheet did. It's what benefits navigators do now at a very, very simplistic level. Some families said no, and if a family said no, you just got to respect it and say, okay, the answer is no. So let's think about, what does full integration look like? What was interesting, and I think continues to be interesting, is that people who were getting jobs and going to work, their friends were pretty impressed that they gotten a job and they had this money they could do things with that they couldn't do with. They didn't have that same kind of money. And so some of the people themselves began to really ask their families to go to work. But we still had families who said, this check's really important to us. It's safe, and we don't want you messing with it. And so we just respected that. I don't think there's anything else you can do about that.
Okay, we got two more questions. We got one is Dorinda is asking about the person-centered training retreat that's held in Atlanta. I'm not quite sure if she's asking about where it was or if there's still one. I'm not quite sure. Do we still have person-centered training retreats in Atlanta?
Well, we don't have, I think she's talking about the gathering. And it happens at Unicoi in the fall. It'll be the second week of September this coming year. And it goes on every single year. It is person-centered thinking, came out of Michael Small's work, which is sort of a spin-off of Beth's work. And it's nobody owns person-centered anything. It is about people. so there's sort of different flavors of the same idea. But that continues. It's a great event. It's grand fun. It gets publicized through DBHDD and through the email list that the gathering group has, the learning community group, to do the gathering. So yeah, it still goes on, and DBHDD is rolling out a new way for people to get person-centered thinking training. It's one day online, it's in Relias, and then it's one day face-to-face. And those trainings are all over the state, and they actually start the first week of March, so next week.
Great. We'll get that information out through the Advancing Employment email list, and we'll get that posted. All right. And Marion David Hensler from St. Petersburg wanted to tell you hello. And then last but not least, just in our last minute, can you address, the importance of having an employment first policy in a state, and where is it at in Georgia? And that comes from a parent who's asking about that. But we just have a little bit of time.
Okay, I'll do my best to answer that. So I'm really sorry that person-centered employment first is not moving quickly in Georgia. It's kind of on hold, is my understanding right now. It's been kind of pulled back by the governor. And I want to say this as good news about that, is that while employment first policy is important, it says what a state values, employment first policy alone has never gotten people jobs. So, and we never had employment first policy until what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago in Georgia, and it was a planning council. I do hope Georgia will get its act together and we will be able to implement a real strongly based employment first policy for the state. But even if we don't, that doesn't mean people can't go to work.
Absolutely. Well, we're out of time. Thank you everyone for attending Advancing Employment's second webinar in our spring series. We hope that you enjoyed Marion's information and webinar. And probably within the next couple of hours, you get an email asking to give some feedback about the presentation, and we appreciate you taking a minute to do so. And also hope that you'll be joining us next week for our third webinar with Dr. Tracy Rackensberger. Everyone have a great day. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Are we off the air?